Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. Listen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe me, because if you're watching this right now, if you found this channel, then maybe you're already in danger too. 3 weeks ago, I inherited a house in Salem, Oregon. Not the Massachusetts one, the quiet one. The one nobody talks about. My great-aunt Martha left it to me, a woman I'd met exactly twice in my entire life. Once at my 5th birthday party, and once at her funeral. The lawyer said she specifically requested I get the house. Me. Not my siblings, not my cousins. Just me. And now I know why. But before I tell you what happened, before I explain why I'm uploading this at 3:47 a.m. with my hands still shaken, I need you to do something for me. Check your surroundings, right now. Look at the corners of your room. The shadows, are they moving differently than they should? No? Good. Then you still have time. Hit that subscribe button now. Because if something happens to me, if this channel goes dark, you'll need to know, you'll need to be ready. The house knows things. It knows what scares you most, and once it knows, it never forgets. The story begins now. The key felt heavier than it should have. That was my first warning. The one I ignored. Standing on the wraparound porch of 1428 Willowbrook Lane, I turned the brass key over in my palm. It was old, probably original to the house, with intricate engravings that looked almost like eyes? No, just scratches. Had to be. The house itself looked normal enough, 2 stories. White siding that needed a fresh coat of paint. Black shutters. A red door that had faded to the color of dried blood. I mean, rust. The color of rust. Are you sure you want to do this alone? My best friend Jake called from his truck. He'd driven me up from Portland. Said he didn't trust my old Honda to make the trip. Truth was, he was worried about me. We all process grief differently, and inheriting a house from a relative you barely knew, that's its own kind of strange. I'll be fine, I called back, forcing a smile. It's just a house. He gave me that look, the one that said he didn't quite believe me. Text me when you're settled. Promise. The truck's engine faded down the street, and then it was just me in the house. The key slid into the lock smoothly, too smoothly, like it had been waiting. Inside, the air tasted stale, but underneath that staleness was something else, something sweet, like vanilla extract mixed with copper pennies. I flicked the light switch. Nothing, of course. The power had probably been off for months, but then the lights came on anyway, one by one, starting from the back of the house and moving forward, like something was walking through, turning them on as it went. My rational brain kicked in. Motion sensors. Had to be motion sensors. Rich old ladies love their smart home tech. The entry hall stretched before me. Hardwood floors polished to a mirror shine despite the dust on everything else. Family photos lined the walls, all in matching frames, all hung at exactly the same height. I recognized a few faces, my mom in her wedding dress, my grandparents on their farm, and there, in the center, was a photo I'd never seen before. It was me, age 7, standing in front of this very house. But I'd never been here before. I was sure of it. Positive, wasn't I? I set my overnight bag down and walked deeper into the house. The living room opened to my left, furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-haunting. To my right, a staircase curved up into darkness, and straight ahead, the kitchen. That's where I found the first note. It was on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. My mother's favorite flower. The paper was yellowed, but the ink looked fresh. Welcome home, dear. I've been waiting. The house has been waiting. Check the upstairs bedroom, the one with the blue door. That's where it starts. M.M. Martha. My hands weren't shaking. Not yet. This was just eccentric old lady stuff. Maybe she'd written notes for all her potential heirs. Maybe. A floorboard creaked upstairs. No. Old houses make noise. That's what they do. Wood expands and contracts. Settling, that's all. I grabbed my bag and headed upstairs. Because I'm apparently the person in horror movies who investigates the strange noise. Each step groaned under my weight, but in a rhythm that sounded almost like words. Come up, come up. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. 4 doors, all closed. 3 white, 1 blue. The blue door was at the end. Of course it was. I walked past the others, trying not to notice how each doorknob turned slightly as I passed, like something inside was testing. Checking if I'd locked them. I hadn't locked them. The blue door opened before I touched it. Inside was my childhood bedroom. Not similar to, not inspired by, it was my childhood bedroom, down to the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and the exact constellations I'd mapped out. The Pokemon comforter I'd begged my mom for, the bookshelf with all my Goosebumps books arranged by number. But that room was in Michigan, in my parents' house, where I grew up. This was Oregon. This was impossible. On the nightstand, right where I used to keep my glass of water, was another note. The house knows, dear, it's always known, what you're afraid of, what keeps you awake at night, what makes you check the locks 3 times before bed. It knows because I told it, because someone told me, because someone told them. The knowing goes back, 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 but don't worry, it only shows you what you fear if you try to leave. Stay and be safe, try to go, and it begins. I laughed, actually laughed, because what else could I do? This was elaborate. Creepy, yes, but elaborate. Martha must have hired someone, researched my childhood, recreated this room as some kind of, what? Psychological experiment? Inheritance test? I pulled out my phone to text Jake. No signal, of course. But the Wi-Fi worked. The password was written on a 3rd note, stuck to the mirror. Password? Your biggest fear 1428. I typed it in, connected immediately. That's when I noticed the mirror wasn't reflecting quite right. In the reflection, the room was my childhood bedroom, yes, but I looked younger? No, not younger. I looked hollow, like something wearing my face but not quite getting it right. I turned away. Stress, had to be stress. The first night was fine, mostly. I ordered pizza from the only place that delivered this far out, some local joint called Antonio's. The delivery guy, a kid maybe 19, wouldn't come onto the porch. Just leave the money in the mailbox, he called from the sidewalk. I'll get it after. After what? I asked. He looked at the house, really looked at it, then back at me. After you go inside. Do you know something about this house? He was already backing toward his beat-up Civic. Lady, everybody knows about that house. Everybody knows to stay away. He paused at his car door. Except the ones it calls. Did it call you? Before I could answer, he was gone. Tires squealing against pavement. The pizza was good, though. I ate it in the kitchen, trying to ignore how every bite echoed in the empty house, trying to ignore how the shadows in the corners seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. I explored more after dinner. Found normal things, boring things. A library with first editions of classics, a sunroom with dead plants. A basement I didn't go into because I'm not completely stupid, but I kept finding notes, hidden in books, tucked behind picture frames. Slipped under doorways I swear I'd already checked. It feeds on fear, but only the deep kind, the childhood kind, the kind that shaped you. The 3rd night is when it starts to show you. Don't look in the mirrors after midnight. The basement door locks from the inside. The last one made me check. The basement door did have a lock on the inside. Like something down there might need to lock the world out. Or lock itself in. I slept in the living room that first night. On the couch, with every light on. Woke up in the blue bedroom. In my childhood bed, with every light off. And a new note on my chest. You can't sleep away from it. The house needs you close. Needs to learn you. 3 nights, dear. 3 nights, and then it knows. Then you can never leave. Just like me. Just like all of us. I packed my bag, fast, threw everything in without folding, without thinking, just grabbed and stuffed and zipped. 3 nights, I wasn't staying 3 minutes more. The front door wouldn't open. The key turned, the deadbolt clicked, but the door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't break. I tried a chair, a lamp, even found a hammer in a kitchen drawer. The glass didn't even scratch. My phone still had signal, somehow. I called Jake. Hey, you settled in okay? His voice sounded distant, underwater. Jake, I need you to come get me. Something's wrong with the house. I can't. What house? My blood turned to slush. The house, my aunt's house. The one you drove me to. Silence. Then, dude, are you feeling okay? You called me yesterday about some inheritance, but you said you were going to wait until spring to check it out. It's October. You're at your apartment. I literally saw you an hour ago at Starbucks. I looked at my phone. The date was wrong. Had to be wrong. It said October 15th. But I'd arrived on November 2nd, I was sure, wasn't I? Jake, please. I'm at 1428 Willowbrook Lane, Salem. Come get me. There is no Willowbrook Lane in Salem. I'm looking at Google Maps right now. Are you sure you're okay? Do you need me to come over? The line went dead. When I tried to call back, the number didn't exist. My contact list was empty except for one number labeled house. I didn't call it. The second night, the house started showing me things. Little things at first. Shadows that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. Doors that were open when I'd closed them. Closed when I'd left them open. Reflections in windows that lagged a half second behind my movements, but then it got personal. I was trying to read in the library, trying to distract myself when I heard it. The sound that still makes my hands shake. The sound I haven't heard since I was 8 years old. Clicking. Rapid rhythmic clicking. Like fingernails on hardwood, like claws. Like the thing that used to live under my bed. Every kid has monster under the bed stories. But mine was specific. It clicked when it moved. Clicked when it breathed. Clicked when it waited for my foot to drop over the edge so it could grab my ankle and pull me under. I used to lie awake for hours, holding my bladder until it hurt, because getting up meant feet on the floor, and feet on the floor meant click, click, click. It was coming from upstairs. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the chair, to keep reading, to pretend I didn't hear it. But the knowing was worse than the seeing. Had to be. The stairs were longer going up this time. I counted 23 steps. There should have been 13. But counting helped. Counting kept the clicking from getting closer. 23, 24, 25. The stairs kept going. 30, 31. The clicking stopped. 32. I reached the hallway. All 4 doors were open now. In each room, a different fear, a different memory made real. Room 1, the basement from my childhood home, the one where the furnace sounded like breathing, where shadows moved independently of their sources, where I'd gotten locked in during a game of hide-and-seek and nobody heard me screaming for 6 hours. Room 2, a hospital room. Sterile white, machines beeping, the smell of disinfectant failing to mask something worse underneath. An empty bed with restraints. A chart with my name. A diagnosis I couldn't read because the words kept changing. Room 3, a classroom. 20 desks, 21 students, all facing away from me, all perfectly still, waiting for me to walk to the front, to turn around, to see their faces, or what should have been faces. Room 4, the blue room, my room. But wrong now. The Pokemon comforter crawling with shapes underneath, the closet door breathing, the glow-in-the-dark stars spelling out words, "You can never leave." I backed into the hallway. The clicking started again. Closer, right behind me. I didn't turn around. You never turn around. That's the rule, the first rule, the most important rule. But I felt breath on my neck. Cold. Wet. Smelling like childhood nightmares and adult anxieties mixed into something worse than both. "I know what you're afraid of," it whispered. Not with words, with clicks shaped into meaning. "I've always known, since the first night you couldn't sleep, since the first time you checked under the bed, since the first time you realized the dark wasn't empty." I ran, flew down the stairs, however many there were, burst into the kitchen, slammed the door, locked it, pushed a chair against it, laughed at myself because doors don't stop the things that live in this house. The clicking came from inside the kitchen now, from the pantry, from behind the refrigerator, from inside the walls. I grabbed a knife, biggest one I could find, not because I thought it would help, because holding something, anything, made me feel less like prey. That's when I saw the photo on the refrigerator had changed. It was still me, still 7 years old, still standing in front of this house. But now I was screaming. The third night I understood. The house doesn't just know your fears. It becomes them, feeds on them, grows stronger with every rapid heartbeat, every held breath, every moment you spend checking shadows for movement. But here's the thing about fear. The thing the house didn't expect me to figure out. Fear has rules. I learned that from years of insomnia, years of checking under beds and in closets, years of jumping at sounds that were just pipes or wind or settling wood. Fear needs you to believe, needs you to participate, needs you to give it power. So I stopped. When the clicking came that third night, louder than before, accompanied by scraping and whispers and sounds no throat should make. I didn't run. I sat in the living room and ate leftover pizza. When every mirror in the house showed different reflections. Younger me, older me, dying me, dead me. I covered them with sheets and went about my business. When the house rearranged itself, halls becoming mazes, stairs leading nowhere, doors opening onto brick walls, I sat down and waited. Everything has to lead somewhere eventually. The house got desperate, started showing me things that should have broken me. My mom's death, 20 years before it would happen, but so real I could smell the hospital disinfectant. My own death, a dozen different ways, each more horrific than the last. Everyone I loved forgetting I existed, everyone I trusted betraying me, every nightmare I'd ever had playing on repeat in every room. But here's what the house didn't understand. I'd already lived through my biggest fear. It happened when I was 7, the day that photo was taken, the day I'd blocked out until I walked into this house. I'd visited Great-Aunt Martha. My parents had brought me, said she was sick and wanted to see me. The house had seemed normal then, just old, just quiet. But she'd taken me aside, brought me to the blue room, though it wasn't blue then, and she'd told me the truth about the family curse, about the thing that followed our bloodline, about how every generation it picked one child, marked them, made them the keeper. "It needs us," she'd said, her fingers ice cold on my shoulders. "Needs our fear to survive, but only one of us. One per generation. And I'm so tired, dear, so very tired of being afraid." She'd done something then, whispered words that weren't in any language I knew, touched my forehead with fingers that burned cold, and I'd screamed as something invisible and ancient and hungry burrowed into me. Screamed as my childhood ended in that instant. Screamed as I understood what she'd done. She'd passed it on. The keeper's burden. The thing that lives on fear. My parents found me unconscious, said I'd fallen, hit my head. They took me home and I forgot. The mind protects itself sometimes, builds walls, hides the things too big to process, but the house remembered. The house always remembers. Now, sitting in that living room on the third night, I finally understood why she'd left me the house. Not as a gift, as a prison. The keeper needs a place to keep. The thing that feeds on fear needs a hunting ground. And I was trapped. Just like she'd been trapped. Just like every keeper before us had been trapped. Unless I did what she did. The house went quiet when it realized what I was thinking. Not peaceful quiet. Predator quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something terrible. "No," the walls whispered. "You're ours now. 3 nights. The rules are binding. You cannot leave. Cannot pass it on. Cannot." But I was already moving. Already heading for the one place I hadn't explored. The basement. The door that locked from the inside. I understood now why it locked that way. Not to keep something in, to keep the keeper out. I broke the lock with the hammer that suddenly worked just fine. The stairs down were wooden, old, creaking with every step. The clicking followed me. Frantic now, afraid. Good. Let it know fear for once. The basement was impossible. Too big, too deep. The walls were covered in photos, thousands of them, every keeper going back generations, all young when they started. All hollow by the end, but in the center, in a circle of salt and symbols I didn't recognize, was a box. Inside the box was a letter and a way out. Not for me. The 3 nights were done. The binding complete. I was the keeper now, and keepers couldn't abandon their posts, but I could do what Martha did. What every keeper eventually did. I could choose the next one. The letter had instructions. Names, addresses, family members I'd never met, distant cousins, second cousins, third, all with the bloodline, all potential keepers. All I had to do was pick one. Invite them, let the house call to them the way it had called to me. 3 nights, that's all it would take. I burned the letter. The house screamed, actually screamed. A sound like wind and breaking glass and dying things all at once. The clicking became thunderous. The walls bled actual blood. But I burned it all, every photo, every name, every connection to the bloodline. If I was trapped, if I was the keeper, then I'd be the last. No more children waking up to clicking under their beds. No more 23-year-olds inheriting cursed houses. No more fear feeding the thing that should have died centuries ago. The house fought me. Through everything it had, every fear, every nightmare, every moment of terror I'd ever felt or would feel. But I'd made my choice. I'm still here, still in the house, still the keeper. The thing that feeds on fear is starving now, getting weaker. But it's not dead, not yet. It takes time to kill something this old, this connected to human terror. But I can wait. I've got nothing but time now. Sometimes I order pizza. Antonio's still delivers, though they use a different driver now. Sometimes I read in the library. Sometimes I sleep in the blue room, in my childhood bed, and dream of the life I could have had. But mostly I make videos. Upload them to YouTube, tell my story. Because the bloodline isn't the only way the house can call someone. It just needs someone afraid, someone alone, Someone who'll watch a video at 3 a.m. and think, that sounds familiar. Those symptoms, that clicking, that fear that shaped them as a child. Someone who'll read the address in the description, who'll drive to Salem, the quiet one, the one nobody talks about, who'll walk up to 1428 Willowbrook Lane and knock on the red door, and I'll let them in, because I'm so tired, so very tired of being afraid. The house is patient, the house is waiting. The house knows there's always someone out there living with their childhood fears, always someone who checks under the bed, always someone who counts the clicks in the darkness, always someone who'll make a perfect keeper. So, still feeling safe? Still sure those shadows in your room are moving normally? Still convinced that sound you heard was just the house settling? Check the description. I've left something for you, something important. But only if you're brave enough. Only if you're ready to know what the house knows. Only if you understand that fear, real fear, the kind that shaped you, never really goes away. It just waits, clicks, and feeds. Sweet dreams. Oh, one more thing, before you go. Before you decide whether to believe me or not, check under your bed tonight. And if you hear clicking, don't answer when it calls your name. Wait, before you go, before you click away thinking this is just another story. I need to tell you something else, something I didn't mention before. You know how I said I burned all the names, all the addresses, all the connections to the bloodline? I lied, I kept one, just one small piece of paper, folded and hidden in my wallet, a safeguard, a just in case, because spending eternity in this house, feeding this thing my own fear while it slowly starves, that's not noble, that's not heroic, that's just another kind of prison. The name on that paper? I won't say it out loud, won't type it here, but I'll tell you this, it's someone who's already scared, someone who's already checking shadows, someone who's already lost sleep to the sound of clicking in the walls, someone who's been watching YouTube horror stories, looking for answers, looking for others who understand what it's like to live with that constant, gnawing certainty that something's wrong. Someone like you. Did you feel it when you started watching? That little tingle at the base of your skull? That sense of recognition? Like you'd heard this story before, maybe in a dream, maybe in a half-remembered childhood moment you've tried so hard to forget. The house has been reaching out through these videos, through the wavelengths, through the static between words, testing, searching, waiting for the right person to respond. And the response doesn't have to be conscious. Sometimes it's just a quickened heartbeat, a held breath, a memory that surfaces unbidden, of that time you knew, absolutely knew. Something was under your bed. That's enough. That's all it needs. The views on this video, they're not random. The algorithm didn't just suggest this to you by chance. The house is old, but it learns, adapts. It knows how to use our modern world, our connected world, our world where fear spreads faster than ever before. Every like, every share, every comment saying, "This feels too real," or "I heard clicking last night." Those aren't just engagement metrics. They're invitations. And some of you have already accepted without knowing it. Check your recent dreams. Have they been different lately? Darker? More vivid? Have you been waking up at specific times? 3:33 a.m., 4:44 a.m. Times that feel significant but you can't say why. Have you noticed that certain shadows in your room seem deeper than they should be? That certain sounds in your house have taken on a rhythm, a pattern, almost like communication? Have you felt watched even when you're alone? That's the house. That's it finding you, testing your walls, your defenses, your fears. And here's the thing. Here's the really terrifying thing. If you've made it this far in the video, if you're still watching, still listening, Still feeling that uncomfortable recognition? Then you're exactly who the house is looking for. The next keeper, the next prisoner, the next person to spend their nights counting clicks and their days pretending everything's fine. Unless you're smart. Unless you close this video right now. Clear your history. Forget you ever heard about 1428 Willowbrook Lane. Forget about the clicking. Forget about me. But you won't, will you? Because the ones the house chooses, they never forget. They can't forget. It's already too late. The clicking has already started. You just haven't learned to hear it yet. But you will, oh, you will. Sweet dreams, and remember, when you hear your name whispered in the darkness tonight, when you feel that certainty that something's under your bed, when every instinct screams at you to keep your feet under the covers, remember that I warned you. Remember that you had a choice. Remember that you kept watching anyway. The house remembers everything, and now it remembers you. Story number 2. The text on my phone screen blurred as I stared at it for the third time. Platform 7B, Union Station, Chicago, 11:47 p.m. My sister Emma had sent the message just 20 minutes ago, but something about it made my skin crawl. Union Station doesn't have a Platform 7B. I've been commuting through that station for 12 years. There's 7A, then it jumps straight to 8. Meet me there, please. I found something incredible. That was the last thing she'd written. Emma never said please, not unless something was really wrong. My fingers hovered over the call button, but I'd already tried 3 times. Straight to voicemail. The November wind cut through my jacket as I stood on the sidewalk, debating. Every instinct told me to go home, to wait until morning. But this was Emma, my little sister who'd been obsessed with urban exploration videos, always talking about hidden tunnels and forgotten spaces beneath the city. I checked my watch, 11:23 p.m. If I hurried, I could make it. Now, before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to share isn't some campfire story or internet creepypasta. This happened 3 weeks ago, and I still can't sleep without checking my phone, hoping for another message from Emma. If you're listening to this alone, especially at night, maybe save it for tomorrow. But if you're like me, if you need to know what's out there in the spaces between the walls we see every day, then keep listening. Because I found Platform 7B, and I wish to God I hadn't. The story begins now. The Uber dropped me off at Union Station at 11:41. 6 minutes to find a platform that shouldn't exist. The Grand Hall was nearly empty, just a few late-night travelers dragging suitcases across the polished marble floor. The departure board flickered above, showing the last trains of the night. Chicago to Milwaukee, Chicago to Detroit. Normal routes. Normal platforms. I walked past the food court, all shuttered except for a single vending machine humming in the corner. My footsteps echoed too loudly, and I found myself walking softer, like I was sneaking somewhere I shouldn't be. Platform 7A was exactly where it always was, down the east corridor. A few people waited there, scrolling through phones, earbuds in. Normal. Everything was normal, except for the maintenance door. I'd passed it 1,000 times. Just a gray metal door between 7A and 8, usually locked, marked authorized personnel only. But tonight it was cracked open. Just barely, a sliver of darkness beyond. My phone buzzed. Emma, you're close, I can feel it. Feel it? What did that mean? I typed back quickly. Em, where are you? This is creeping me out. 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Through the door, hurry. They only keep it open for a few minutes. They? Who were they? But I was already moving, already pushing the door wider. It opened silently, too silently for a door that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Beyond was a narrow staircase leading down, lit by old fluorescent bulbs that flickered every few seconds. The walls were concrete, unpainted, with pipes running along the ceiling. I should have turned back. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was screaming at me to turn back. But Emma's obsession with urban exploration had rubbed off on me over the years. She'd shown me photos of abandoned subway tunnels, forgotten bomb shelters from the Cold War, entire floors of buildings that had been sealed off and forgotten. Chicago was full of hidden spaces, spaces that existed in the gaps of city planning, in the margins of old blueprints. The stairs went down farther than they should have. Union Station only has one underground level for the trains, but I counted 3 flights before I reached another door. This one was newer, with a small window. Through it, I could see a train platform. But not like any platform I'd ever seen in Union Station. The ceiling was lower here, oppressive. The pillars were older, maybe from the 1920s, with Art Deco designs that had been painted over so many times they were just lumpy shadows of their former selves. And the lighting. Everything was bathed in this sickly yellow-green glow, like those old mercury vapor lamps they used to use before everyone realized they were toxic. A sign hung from the ceiling. Platform 7B. Special service. Special service to where? I pushed through the door. The air hit me immediately, stale, with an undertone of something chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with that ozone smell you get from old electrical equipment. The platform stretched out in both directions, disappearing into darkness. But it wasn't empty. There were people waiting. At first glance, they looked normal. Business suits, winter coats, the usual late-night Chicago crowd. But something was off. They all stood perfectly still, facing the tracks. No one was checking their phone. No one was shifting their weight or adjusting their bags. They just stood there, waiting. "Emma?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. One of the figures turned, a woman in a navy coat, maybe 40 years old. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "First time?" she asked. Her voice was pleasant, conversational, too pleasant for nearly midnight in an impossible train platform. I'm looking for my sister, Emma Chen. She said she'd be here." The woman's smile widened. "Oh, she's already on the train. You better hurry if you want to catch her. It doesn't wait long." Train? There was no train. The tracks were empty, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. But even as I thought that, I heard it. A distant rumbling, growing closer. "What train?" I asked. "Where does it go?" The woman turned back to face the tracks. "Different places for different people. You'll see." The rumbling grew louder. The other waiting passengers began to shift, finally showing signs of life. They moved forward as one, crowding near the platform edge. The fluorescent lights flickered more rapidly, creating a strobe effect that made everything look like it was moving in slow motion. Then I saw the train. It came out of the darkness like something from another era. The engine was wrong. Too long, too narrow, with windows that were placed at odd intervals. The metal wasn't the shiny steel of modern trains, but something duller, older. It looked like someone had taken a dozen different train cars from different decades and welded them together. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I could see through it. Not completely. It was solid enough, but there was a translucency to it, like looking at a reflection in a window at night. And through that semi-transparent shell, I could see passengers already on board. They sat in rows, unmoving, their faces turned toward the windows, but not really looking out. Just sitting there. The train slowed to a stop. No brakes squealed, no announcement played. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the waiting passengers began to board. They moved in perfect synchronization like they'd rehearsed this. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run. But then I saw her. Emma. She was in the third car, sitting by a window. She wasn't looking out like the others. She was looking directly at me, her hand pressed against the glass. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. "Emma!" I ran toward the train, but the woman in the navy coat caught my arm. "Ticket?" she asked. "I don't... What ticket? I just need to get my sister." She tilted her head, studying me. "Everyone needs a ticket for the special service, didn't she tell you?" "Tell me what? Look, I don't know what this is, but..." The train doors began to close. "No!" I yanked free from the woman's grip and lunged for the nearest door. My hand caught the edge just as it sealed shut. Through the window, I could see Emma standing now, pounding on the glass. Other passengers turned to look at her with blank expressions, like mannequins slowly rotating their heads. The train began to move. I ran alongside it, trying to keep pace, but it accelerated impossibly fast. Within seconds, it was just taillights disappearing into the tunnel. Then even those were gone, swallowed by darkness. "You missed it," the woman said behind me. She sounded genuinely sympathetic. "But don't worry, there's always another train." I spun around. The platform was empty. All the other passengers had boarded. It was just me and this woman in the sickly yellow-green light. "Where does it go?" I demanded. "Where did it take my sister?" She smiled that not quite right smile again. "Where do you think it goes? Where do any of us go in the end?" Before I could respond, the lights went out. Complete darkness. The kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I fumbled for my phone, but when I pulled it out, the screen wouldn't turn on. Dead. Even though it had been at 60% when I arrived. Then a sound, footsteps. Multiple sets, moving in the darkness. Getting closer and breathing. Slow, rhythmic breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I'd like to tell you I was brave. That I stood my ground and demanded answers. But the truth is, I ran. In complete darkness, I ran back the way I'd come, my hands outstretched, feeling for the door. My fingers hit concrete, cold and rough. I followed the wall, trying not to think about what might be following me. The breathing sounds grew closer. And now there were whispers too. Not in English. Not in any language I recognized. They overlapped, creating this horrible harmony that made my teeth ache. My hand found the door handle. I yanked it open and stumbled through, expecting to find the staircase. Instead, I was in another corridor. This one was lit by emergency lighting, casting everything in deep red. The walls were lined with posters, old advertisements for train routes that didn't make sense. Chicago to nowhere, daily service. Ride the Silver Line to yesterday. Final destinations. No return tickets necessary. I kept running. The corridor branched off in multiple directions, a maze of passages that couldn't possibly exist under Union Station. I knew the layout of this place. I'd studied the maps out of boredom during countless commutes. This was all wrong. A door appeared on my left. Through its window, I glimpsed another platform. This one was crowded with people, but they were all facing away from me, staring at empty tracks. Their clothes were from different eras, 1950s dresses next to 1980s business suits next to modern streetwear, all standing perfectly still. I kept moving. Another door, another platform. This one was flooded with water up to ankle height. A single figure stood in the center, water lapping at their legs. They turned as I passed, and I caught a glimpse of a face that was wrong. Features that didn't quite line up, like a face reflected in disturbed water. More corridors. More impossible platforms. Each one showing a different scene, a different wrongness. I was lost in some kind of underground labyrinth that existed parallel to the real station, occupying the same space but in a different, dimension? Reality? Finally, gasping for breath, I stopped. The whispers had faded, but I could still hear that rhythmic breathing, always just one corridor behind me. I leaned against the wall, trying to think. Emma had found this place. Somehow, she discovered Platform 7B and whatever this network of impossible spaces was. And she'd gotten on that train. Why? What could possibly be worth? "You look lost." I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man stood a few feet away, though I hadn't heard him approach. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a janitor's uniform with Union Station embroidered on the pocket. Normal. He looked completely normal. My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat. "I need to get out. Back to the real station." He tilted his head. "Real station? This is all real, friend. Just different levels of real. Please, I just want to leave. My sister, she got on some train and I need to—" "Platform 7B." He nodded knowingly. "Yeah, that's a popular one. Lots of people looking for answers end up there. Your sister must have had questions." "Questions about what?" He started walking, gesturing for me to follow. I didn't have much choice. About what's next, about what's beyond, about all the things we're not supposed to know until it's our time to know them. The train on 7B, it shows you. But once you get on, you can't get off until you reach your stop. What stop? Where does it go? We turned a corner, and suddenly we were in a utility room. Normal pipes, normal electrical panels, a normal door marked exit. "Different places for different people," he said, echoing what the woman had told me. "Some folks ride it to see deceased loved ones. Others are looking for glimpses of the future. Some just want to know if there's anything after, after. After death?" He shrugged. "After whatever comes next. Your sister, what was she looking for?" I thought about Emma's obsession with hidden spaces, her constant need to explore and document. But lately, she'd been different, quieter. She'd broken up with her boyfriend, lost her job, spent more time on those urban exploration forums. "I don't know," I admitted. The janitor opened the exit door. Beyond, I could see the familiar fluorescent lighting of Union Station's maintenance areas. "Well, she'll be back. They always come back. The train makes a circuit, see? Different stops, different sites, but it always returns to Platform 7B. Might be an hour, might be a day, might be..." He paused. "Well, time moves funny on that train, but she'll be back." "How do you know all this?" He smiled, but it was sad. "Because I've been watching people get on and off that train for 37 years, ever since I took my own ride." I looked at him more closely. Despite his young appearance, there was something ancient in his eyes. 37 years ago, I was dying," he continued. "Cancer. Doctors gave me 3 months. I heard rumors about Platform 7B, about a train that could take you to see what came after. So I found it, bought a ticket, rode it all the way to the end. And I saw. Can't tell you what, that's different for everyone. But when I came back, the cancer was gone. Doctors couldn't explain it, but there was a price. I can't leave the station now. Can't go more than a few blocks before I start to fade. Like I'm not quite solid anymore. So I work here, help lost souls like you find their way out. Or in, if that's what they really want." He held the door open for me. "Your sister will be back. When she is, the door to 7B will open again. You can wait for her in the real station. Time moves normal up there." I wanted to ask more questions, but that breathing sound was getting closer again. The janitor heard it too. His face paled. "Go," he said urgently. "The night shift doesn't like visitors. Go." I stumbled through the door and found myself in a familiar maintenance hallway, the kind with industrial yellow paint and employees only signs every few feet. My phone suddenly came back to life, buzzing with notifications. 3:17 a.m. I'd been down there for over 3 hours, but it had felt like minutes. I made my way back to the main station, my legs shaking. The grand hall was completely empty now, chairs stacked on tables in the closed restaurants. A security guard gave me a suspicious look but didn't stop me as I collapsed onto a bench near platform 7A. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the tall windows. 6:43 a.m. The station was coming alive with morning commuters, the smell of coffee from the reopened shops, the mechanical voice announcing departures. No sign of Emma. I called in sick to work and spent the day waiting. The door between platforms 7A and 8 remained stubbornly normal, locked, unremarkable. I tried the handle once when no one was looking. Solid, immovable. By evening, I was exhausted. I'd subsisted on vending machine food and terrible coffee, never leaving sight of that door. Other people came and went. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware of what existed just beneath their feet. At 11:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after Emma's text, I heard it. A soft click. The maintenance door was open again. Just a crack, just like before. This time I was ready. I'd spent the day researching on my phone, diving deep into urban exploration forums, old newspaper archives, anything that mentioned unusual platforms or trains. I'd found fragments, stories dating back to the 1920s, about people disappearing from Union Station, about maintenance workers reporting impossible geometries in the lower levels, about a conductor who claimed to drive a train that went to places that weren't places, but nothing concrete, nothing that would help me get Emma back. I pushed through the door. The staircase was the same, but this time I counted the steps. 47 down to the first landing, 33 to the second, 29 to the door to platform 7B. The platform was crowded this time, maybe 30 people, all in that same eerie stillness, all facing the empty tracks. I scanned the crowd for Emma, but didn't see her. Back again? The woman in the navy coat stood beside me. Same smile, same too pleasant voice. Where's my sister? On the train, of course. It hasn't completed its circuit yet. The janitor said it would be back by now. Her smile faltered slightly. Janitor? Oh, you met Marcus. Poor thing, yes. Well, time is subjective on the special service. Your sister bought a specific ticket, you see, a longer journey. What kind of ticket? Before she could answer, the rumbling started again. That impossible train sliding out of the darkness, its translucent shell revealing the passengers within. More this time. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all sitting in perfect rows, all staring straight ahead. The train stopped. The doors opened. The waiting crowd began to board. I need to get on, I said. Not without a ticket. Then give me one. She reached into her coat and pulled out what looked like an old train ticket, the kind they used to punch with hole punchers. It was blank, except for 2 words. One way. Are you sure? She asked. Once you board, you can't get off until you reach your destination. And your destination, well, that depends on what you're really looking for. I thought about Emma. My little sister who'd always been braver than me, always pushing boundaries. She'd found this place, bought a ticket, gotten on that train. For what? What could possibly be worth? Then I remembered. 3 weeks before she disappeared, we'd had dinner. She'd been quiet, picking at her food. When I asked what was wrong, she'd said something that hadn't made sense at the time. Do you ever wonder if we're living in the right version of reality? Like maybe there are other versions where things went differently? Where the people we lost are still alive? Our parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Emma had been in the car, survived with barely a scratch. Survivor's guilt, the therapist had said, but it had never really gone away. She's looking for them, I said out loud. She's looking for our parents. The woman nodded slowly. The special service can take you to many places. including places that might have been. But the price? What price? The longer you stay, the less solid your connection to your original reality becomes. Stay too long, and you might not be able to come back at all. You'll become like the other passengers, riding forever, searching for something that may not exist. The train doors began to close. I grabbed the ticket from her hand and ran. Behind me, she called out something, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat. I jumped through the nearest door just as it sealed shut. Inside, the train was silent. No engine noise, no sound of movement, even though I could feel we were accelerating. The passengers sat in perfect rows, and now that I was among them, I could see why they looked so wrong. They were faded, like old photographs left in the sun. Still solid enough to see, but missing something essential. Their eyes were the worst part, empty, like they'd looked at too much and couldn't process anymore. I walked through the cars, looking for Emma. The train seemed to go on forever, car after car of silent, faded passengers. Some looked recent, modern clothes, cell phones clutched in translucent hands. Others looked older, their clothing from decades past. Finally, in what must have been the 20th car, I found her. Emma sat by a window, staring out at the darkness rushing by. But it wasn't really darkness. As I looked closer, I could see shapes in it. Fragments of scenes, like someone had shattered reality and scattered the pieces outside the train. I saw our old house, the one we'd grown up in. I saw Mom's garden, Dad's workshop. But they were wrong. Assembled from memory rather than reality. Details blurred or missing entirely. Em? She turned slowly, and I bit back a gasp. She was faded too, not as bad as the others, but I could see the seat behind her through her body. David? Her voice was distant, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. What are you doing here? I came to get you, to bring you home. She shook her head. I can't, not yet. I almost found them. I saw them, David, at the station 3 stops ago. They were waiting for a train, just like they were that day. If I can get to the right stop, the right moment, I can warn them. I can save them. Emma, this isn't time travel. This is something else. I know what it is, she said. And for a moment, her eyes focused on me with perfect clarity. It's the space between life and death, between was and might have been. The train runs through all of it, and if you know where to get off. The train began to slow. Outside the window, I saw a platform materialize from the darkness. It looked like Union Station, but wrong. The architecture was twisted, stairs leading up to floors that couldn't exist, doorways opening onto empty air. Some of the passengers stood up, moving toward the exits. This is my stop, Emma said. Stop number 7. 3 more, and I'll be at the accident. I can save them. Emma, please, look at yourself. You're fading. If you stay on this train much longer. I know the price, she interrupted. Marcus told me. 37 years he's been stuck in the station because he rode the train too long. But he's alive, isn't he? And if I can save Mom and Dad, isn't that worth it? The doors opened. The faded passengers filed out onto the impossible platform. Emma stood to join them. I grabbed her arm. It felt like holding fog. They're gone, Em. They've been gone for 5 years. This won't bring them back. It'll just trap you in some in-between place, riding this train forever, looking for a moment that doesn't exist anymore. She looked at me, and I saw tears tracking down her translucent cheeks. But what if it does? What if I can find it? And what if you can't? What if you just fade away completely, become another ghost riding this train for eternity? The doors began to close. Emma pulled free from my grip. I have to try, she said, and stepped off the train. I lunged after her, but the doors sealed shut. Through the window, I watched her walk across that twisted platform, already fainter than she'd been moments before. She turned back once, raised her hand in what might have been a wave, and then disappeared into the architectural impossibility of the station. The train lurched forward, carrying me into darkness. I don't know how long I rode that train. Time didn't work right. I'd check my phone, see that 3 minutes had passed, then look again, and it would show 2 hours earlier. The battery never died, but the signal showed carriers that didn't exist. VoidNet, Eternicell, Last Call Wireless. The stops came and went. Each platform showed a different impossibility. A station underwater where the passengers had gills. A platform in the clouds where people stepped off into open air and floated away. A stop that was just a massive cemetery, headstones stretching to the horizon. And at each stop, more passengers got off. Fewer got on. The train grew emptier, quieter. The faded passengers who remained became harder to see, some barely more than suggestions of human shapes. I found myself fading, too. My hands grew translucent. When I looked in the train's bathroom mirror, I could see the wall behind me through my reflection. The janitor had been right. The longer you rode, the less connected to reality you became. But I couldn't get off. Not at the nightmare platforms, not at the impossible ones. I needed to get back to 7B, back to the real world or whatever was left of it. Finally, after what felt like days, or maybe years, I heard the announcement. Not over speakers. The train had no speakers. The words just appeared in my mind, in a voice that sounded like grinding metal and distant screams. Next stop, platform 7B, end of the line. All passengers must disembark. End of the line? But the woman had said it was a circuit, that it kept going. The train slowed. Through the windows I saw the familiar sickly yellow-green light of platform 7B, but it was different now. The platform was cracked, chunks of concrete falling away into nothingness. The pillars were crumbling. The Art Deco designs writhed like living things, and it was full of people. Hundreds of them, all faded to different degrees, all waiting. As the train stopped, they pressed forward, trying to board. No! The woman in the navy coat appeared, but she was ancient now, her face a map of wrinkles, her coat threadbare. This is the last train, the last circuit. The station is closing. Closing? I stumbled off the train, my legs barely solid enough to support me. Around me, chaos erupted. The waiting passengers pushed past, desperate to board. The faded ones from the train stumbled off, confused, lost. What's happening? I asked the woman. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. 73 years this platform has existed. 73 years of taking people to places they shouldn't go, showing them things they shouldn't see, but everything ends, even impossible things. The platform shook. Cracks spread across the ceiling, and that chemical formaldehyde smell grew stronger. You need to leave, she said. Find the stairs. Get back to the real station before this place collapses completely. What about all these people? They made their choice. They rode the train too long, stayed in the spaces between until they forgot how to be solid. When this place goes, they go with it. Another shake, stronger. A chunk of ceiling crashed down, revealing not dirt or pipes, but absolute void. Nothingness so complete it hurt to look at. I ran. My translucent legs carried me to the door, up the stairs. But the stairs were wrong now. Some leading up, some leading down, some leading sideways into walls. The geometry was breaking down, the careful separation between the real station and this impossible space failing. Behind me, I heard the train's whistle. One last departure. One last journey to nowhere. I climbed, crawled, pulled myself up stairs that existed and didn't exist. My body flickered between solid and shadow. Just when I thought I was lost forever in the collapsing architecture, I saw it. The maintenance door. still cracked open, showing the blessed normalcy of Union Station beyond. I threw myself through just as the world behind me imploded. The door slammed shut. When I tried the handle, it was locked. Solid, immovable, but not normal, because now there was a sign on it. Fresh paint, still wet. Condemned, structural damage, do not enter. And below that, in smaller letters that might have been scratched by fingernails, Emma Chen, still searching. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm mostly solid now, though sometimes in mirrors I can still see through myself a little. The doctors said I had a psychotic break, that I was found unconscious in Union Station at 6 a.m., dehydrated and delirious. They don't believe me about the train, about Platform 7B, about Emma. Emma is still missing. The police have no leads. Her apartment is untouched, her phone dead. The only evidence she ever existed are the messages on my phone, including that last one telling me to meet her at Platform 7B. But when I show them to people, they just see gibberish, random characters that don't form words. I go back to Union Station sometimes. The maintenance store is welded shut now, covered with so many warning signs it's almost comedic. But late at night, if you press your ear against it, you can hear things. Distant train whistles, footsteps on impossible stairs, and sometimes, very faintly, crying, the janitor, Marcus. I've looked for him. No one at Union Station has heard of a janitor named Marcus. The employee records show no one by that name has ever worked there. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see him. Always in the distance, always walking away. When I try to follow, he vanishes around corners that lead nowhere. I've done research, dug deep into city records, historical archives, newspaper morgues. Platform 7B isn't unique. Every major train station has stories like this. Platforms that shouldn't exist, trains that go nowhere, passengers who never arrive. They're always dismissed as urban legends, mass hysteria, the fevered imaginings of tired commuters. But I know better now. I know that reality has cracks, spaces between what is and what isn't. And in those spaces, things exist that follow different rules. Trains that carry the desperate and the lost to destinations that can't be mapped. Platforms that serve as waypoints between life and whatever comes after. And I know that somewhere in one of those spaces, Emma is still searching. Still riding that translucent train, getting fainter with each stop, looking for a moment that slipped away 5 years ago. Part of me wants to find another way in, to try to save her. But I remember the faded passengers, the empty eyes, the way they'd forgotten how to be human, how to be real. And I remember the woman's words, everything ends, even impossible things. So I wait and I watch. And sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I swear I can hear a train whistle in the distance. Not from Union Station, from somewhere else, somewhere between. If you hear it too, if you find a door that's usually locked standing open, if someone you love texts you about a platform that shouldn't exist, don't go. Let the impossible stay impossible. Let the spaces between remain empty, because some trains only run one way, and some destinations, once reached, don't let you come back. But if you do go, if curiosity or desperation drives you to buy that ticket, look for Emma Chen. Tell her that her brother is waiting. Tell her that it's okay to let go, that Mom and Dad wouldn't want this for her. Tell her to come home, while home still exists to come back to. I need to end this here. It's 11:47 p.m., and I just got a text. Not from Emma. From a number I don't recognize. All it says is Platform 7B is reopening. One night only. Last chance. I told myself I wouldn't go. I've told myself that every night for 3 weeks. But tonight feels different. Tonight I can feel something calling me. Maybe it's Emma. Maybe it's the train itself. Maybe it's just the human need to look into the darkness and see what looks back. I'm going to Union Station. If you don't hear from me again, you'll know what happened. You'll know I bought a ticket for the special service, stepped onto that impossible train, and went looking for my sister in the spaces between. But before I go, I need you to remember something. Remember that the world has hidden places, impossible spaces that exist in the cracks of reality. They're not meant for us. We're too solid, too real, too bound by the rules of what is. But sometimes when we lose something we can't bear to lose, we go looking in those spaces anyway. We buy tickets to nowhere. We board trains that shouldn't exist. We fade away searching for what was or what might have been. If someone you love disappears into those spaces, you have a choice. You can let them go, let them fade, let them become another ghost riding an endless circuit through nowhere. Or you can follow them down. Buy your own ticket. Board your own train. Just remember, every journey has a price, and some prices aren't paid in money. They're paid in reality itself. The clock just struck midnight. The message is still there, glowing on my phone screen. One last chance. I'm going. If you're listening to this in the dark, wondering about the spaces between, about the platforms that don't exist, stay wondering. Stay solid, stay real. But if you can't, if the pull is too strong, then I'll see you on platform 7B. The train is always waiting.
Story number 3.
I found them the day my grandmother's hair started disappearing. Not all at once. Just strands. Thin patches where her silver curls used to catch the afternoon light streaming through the nursing home window. The nurses at Sunnyvale Senior Living in Tucson blamed it on stress, medication, age. But I knew better. I'd seen the tiny trails of black dots leading from her pillow to the crack in the wall. If you're still listening, good. Because what I'm about to tell you will make you check every crack in your bedroom tonight. Every time your hair feels a little thinner. Every time you wake up with that crawling sensation on your scalp. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm an entomologist. I don't know anymore. After what happened at Sunnyvale, I'm not sure I can call myself anything but a survivor. It started 3 months ago. Tuesday, October 15th. I remember because that's the day Grandma Rose called me crying about her hair. Not the usual complaints about going gray or thinning with age. This was different. "They're taking it, Sarah," she whispered into the phone. "At night, I can feel them." I drove down from Phoenix that evening, expecting to find another episode of her increasing paranoia. The doctors had warned us about cognitive decline. But when I walked into room 247 and saw her, my stomach dropped. Perfect circles of baldness dotted her scalp. Not random patches like alopecia, geometric, precise, like someone had used a hole punch on her head. "Grandma." I knelt beside her wheelchair, trying to keep my voice steady. "When did this start?" She grabbed my hand with surprising strength. 2 weeks ago, first just a few hairs on my pillow, then more. Then she touched one of the bald spots. I tried to tell them, the nurses. They gave me sleeping pills. I examined the spots under the lamp. The skin was smooth, unblemished. No inflammation, no scarring, just absence. And there, caught in the light, a single black ant crawled across her scalp. My blood chilled. I'd studied ants for 15 years, published papers on leafcutter colonies, documented new species in the Sonoran Desert, but I'd never seen anything like this. The ant was wrong. Its mandibles were too large, too specialized, like tiny scissors made of chitin. Mrs. Chen, a nurse, appeared in the doorway. Janet, according to her name tag. Mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a perfect bun. Too perfect, not a strand out of place. Visiting hours end in 30 minutes. "My grandmother's losing her hair in patches," I said, standing. "Has anyone else reported this?" Janet's smile faltered for just a second, a micro-expression that made my skin crawl. The doctor prescribed a topical treatment. It's quite common in perfect circles. I held up my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken. This pattern isn't natural. She glanced at the images, then at the door. Her pupils dilated slightly, and I swear I saw her nostrils flare like she was smelling something. I need to check on other patients. After she left, Grandma squeezed my hand again. Room 232, Mrs. Goldstein. She's bald now, completely, started the same way. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. And room 198, Mr. Patterson. They found him this morning covered in things, little white things like rice grains. He kept trying to eat them. I promised to investigate and stayed until the staff practically pushed me out. But I didn't go home. I sat in my car in the parking lot, laptop open, searching for anything about ants and human hair. Nothing. No scientific literature. No documented cases. The security lights cast long shadows across the building's facade. Something about the architecture bothered me. The proportions were wrong. The windows too small, the walls too thick. Like the building wasn't designed for human comfort, but for something else entirely. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Grandma. "They're here," she breathed. "I can feel them. Sarah, there are so many more tonight. Don't move. I'm coming." I grabbed my field kit from the trunk. Forceps, collection vials, magnifying glass, portable microscope, and ran for the entrance. The night security guard was asleep at his desk, drooling slightly. His hair looked thin, patchy. Fresh scabs dotted his scalp. I slipped past, took the stairs 2 at a time. The hallway was dark except for the emergency exit signs, but I could hear something. A subtle rustling, like wind through dry leaves. It seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. Room 247. I pushed open the door slowly. Grandma was sitting up in bed, rigid with fear. In the moonlight from the window, I saw them, a line of ants, marching from the crack in the wall to her bed, up the metal frame, across the white sheets, onto her pillow. But it wasn't just one line. As my eyes adjusted, I saw dozens of trails. The walls writhed with movement. Thousands of ants, all focused on the same task. I flicked on my penlight. The ants didn't scatter. They continued their procession, each one carrying something. I leaned closer, adjusting my magnifying glass, trying not to breathe too hard and disturb their work. Hair. Each ant carried a single strand of human hair, but they weren't just taking it randomly. They were selective, choosing specific strands with surgical precision, testing each one with their antennae before cutting it free with those modified mandibles. My hands shook as I collected samples. The ants ignored me, focused on their harvest. Some carried silvery white strands from Grandma's head. Others emerged from the walls carrying different colors: blonde, brown, black, a rainbow of human hair, all converging on the same destination. I followed their trail to the wall crack. It disappeared into darkness, but I could hear them. Thousands of tiny feet, a rustling like whispered secrets. And underneath it all, something else. A humming, musical and hypnotic. "How long?" I asked Grandma, not taking my eyes off the procession. "Every night for 2 weeks. They come at 2:17 exactly. But tonight they brought friends." I checked my phone, 2:19 a.m. As I watched, something larger emerged from the crack. Not quite an ant, longer, more sophisticated. Its head swiveled toward me, and I glimpsed eyes that caught the light like tiny mirrors. It studied me for a long moment, then clicked its mandibles in a pattern that sounded almost like communication. The smaller ants immediately began moving faster, more efficiently, like they'd received orders. As the last ant disappeared into the wall, the room fell silent except for Grandma's breathing and my racing heart. But on the pillow where her head had been, I noticed something new. Tiny white specks, almost invisible. Seeds. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I sat in my Phoenix apartment, surrounded by research papers and ant specimens, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The samples I'd collected defied classification. Their DNA was different, evolved, specialized beyond anything in the fossil record. But it wasn't random evolution. The modifications were too precise, too purposeful, like someone had taken ordinary ants and redesigned them for a specific task. The question was, who and why? On Thursday, I called my colleague at ASU, Dr. Marcus Webb. We'd worked together on desert ant colonies for years, published 3 papers on their social organization. If anyone would believe me, it would be Marcus. Marcus, I need you to look at something. Can you meet me at the lab? Sure. Everything okay? You sound rattled. I met him at the university, handed him the vials. Marcus was tall, lean, with prematurely gray hair that he claimed came from too many years studying social insects. He had the kind of methodical mind that could piece together complex biological puzzles. He studied the specimens under the microscope, frowning deeper with each passing minute. His usual scientific detachment evaporated as he switched to higher magnifications. Sarah, where did you get these? Does it matter? He looked up, eyes wide behind his glasses. These aren't just carrying hair, they're processing it, look. He adjusted the scope, his hands trembling slightly. Their mandibles have specialized grooves for stripping keratin, and their social stomach, it's enlarged. They're not eating the hair, they're storing it. For what? I don't know. But this level of specialization doesn't happen overnight. This is millions of years of evolution. Or what? He pulled back from the microscope, removing his glasses to clean them nervously. Or something made them this way. Sarah, these cellular modifications, they're too perfect, too targeted. It's like someone took the ant genome and rewrote sections of it. That's impossible. We don't have that kind of technology. We don't, but what if something else does? The implications hung in the air between us. I thought about the larger ant I'd seen, with its mirror-bright eyes and apparent intelligence. What if these weren't just insects following instinct, but soldiers following orders? I returned to Sunnyvale that evening, armed with better equipment. Thermal cameras, motion sensors, pheromone traps, chemical analysis kits. If these ants were farming human hair, I needed to know why. Janet was at the nurse's station when I arrived, but she wasn't alone. 3 other staff members clustered around her, all with that same perfect posture, that same unsettling stillness. They looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I felt like prey being evaluated by predators. Back again? Janet's smile didn't reach her eyes. Up close, I could see tiny scars along her hairline, surgical precision marks. I'm staying with my grandmother tonight. Visitors aren't allowed after. I'm not a visitor, I'm a scientist, and something in this building is attacking residents. I showed her my ASU credentials, noting how the other staff members leaned in to examine them. Their movements were synchronized, like a hive mind. Would you prefer I contact the health department? She paled, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear. Calculation. Room 247, one night only. As I walked down the hallway, I felt their eyes on my back. In the reflection of a window, I saw them huddled together, heads bent close, discussing something in whispers too low to hear. Grandma was delighted to see me, but I noticed changes. Her remaining hair seemed more vibrant, almost luminescent in the overhead light. And her eyes, were they always that sharp, that aware? We spent the evening talking, playing cards, pretending everything was normal. But as midnight approached, we both grew quiet, waiting. "Sarah," she said suddenly, "I need to tell you something. About my dreams." Dreams. I see them. The place they come from. Deep underground, like a city. Made of us, our hair, our essence. And there are others there. Not ants, not human, something new. At 2:10 a.m., I set up my equipment. Thermal camera pointed at the wall crack. Motion sensors on the bed frame. Collection containers ready. Chemical sensors that would detect pheromone signatures. 2:15 a.m. Grandma lay still, eyes closed but awake. I could see her pulse in her throat, rapid but steady. 2:17 a.m. They came. The thermal camera showed them first. A heat signature moving through the walls like a living river, flowing along predetermined paths. Then the scouts emerged, larger than the workers I'd seen before. They circled the room, antennae twitching, before returning to the crack. But tonight, they brought backup. My chemical sensors went crazy as pheromones flooded the air. Communication chemicals, yes, but also something else. Something that made my vision blur and my thoughts slow. The workers followed. Hundreds, thousands, more than before. They moved with military precision, forming multiple columns, each with a specific task. But tonight was different. Tonight, they weren't just taking hair. They were bringing something back. I watched through the magnifying glass as workers emerged from the wall carrying tiny white objects. Not eggs. Too hard. Too uniform, geometric. They placed them carefully on Grandma's pillow, in her hair, along her scalp with the care of gardeners planting seeds. Seeds. That's exactly what they were. "Don't move," I whispered to Grandma, though every instinct screamed to brush them away. The ants worked with inhuman precision, each one knowing exactly where to place its cargo. The seeds weren't random either. Each one was positioned at precise intervals, forming a pattern I almost recognized. Something mathematical, purposeful. Then, as suddenly as they'd come, they retreated. But not all of them. A few remained, stationed around the room like sentries, watching, waiting. The room emptied, silent except for the soft clicking of the remaining ants and an almost inaudible humming from the seeds themselves. I collected several samples, sealing them in vials with shaking hands. Under the portable microscope, they looked almost crystalline. Definitely organic, but unlike anything I'd seen. They pulsed with their own inner light, like tiny stars. "What are they doing to me?" Grandma's voice was small. Scared, but something else too. Curious? Excited? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. The next morning, I knocked on room 232. Mrs. Goldstein answered, completely bald as Grandma had said. But her scalp, it wasn't smooth. Tiny bumps covered her head like a landscape of miniature hills, and her eyes were different. Brighter, more aware. "The ants?" I asked gently. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. 3 months ago. They took it all, then... She touched her head. These started growing. "May I?" She let me examine her scalp with the magnifying glass. The bumps were follicles. New ones. But the hair growing from them wasn't hair. It was something else. Thin, translucent fibers that caught the light like spider silk or fiber optics. "Does it hurt?" "No, but sometimes I hear them, in the walls, singing. And sometimes," she leaned closer, whispering, "sometimes I understand what they're saying." I spent the next week in the lab, barely eating, barely sleeping. The seeds were unlike anything in botanical literature. They contained human DNA, specifically keratin proteins from hair, but modified, engineered. When I managed to germinate one in a controlled environment, what grew wasn't a plant. It was a structure, a tiny, perfect lattice of keratin and chitin, like a scaffold or a nursery, and it was hollow inside, designed to house something specific. Marcus helped me research, though I could see the fear growing in his eyes with each discovery. He'd grown quieter, more distracted. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the specimens with an expression I couldn't read. "Sarah, these ants, they're not just farming hair. They're cultivating something, using human keratin as a growth medium." "For what?" He showed me the electron microscope images. "These structures, they're designed to house something. Larvae, maybe, but not ant larvae, something else, something bigger." The images were haunting. Perfect geometric chambers, each one sized for a specific purpose. Nurseries for creatures that didn't exist yet, or shouldn't exist. I thought of Mrs. Goldstein's translucent hair, the way she said she could hear them singing, the way Grandma's dreams were becoming more vivid. "Marcus, what if this isn't random? What if someone's been planning this?" He looked at me sharply. "Planning what?" "An invasion, a transformation. What better way to take over than from within? Use our own biology against us." That night, I returned to Sunnyvale. But I didn't go to Grandma's room. I went to the basement. If the ants were traveling through the walls, they had to have a central nest somewhere. And if they were building something, I needed to know what. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and utility corridors, hot water pipes, electrical conduits, and there, behind the boiler room, a door marked Condemned 1952. The date bothered me. 1952, the same year the building was constructed. What had they condemned? And why was the lock broken from the inside? I should have turned back, called for help, done anything but descend those stairs with only a flashlight and my field kit. But I needed answers. The temperature rose as I descended. The walls changed from concrete to earth, packed dirt reinforced with something white and fibrous. Human hair, millions of strands woven into a living architecture. And the smell, sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit mixed with shampoo. At the bottom, a tunnel stretched into darkness. The walls moved. Millions of ants, traveling in perfect highways along the ceiling and floor. They ignored me, focused on their tasks, but I could feel eyes watching from the shadows. Larger eyes, more intelligent. I followed the tunnel, trying not to think about the weight of earth above me. The air grew thicker, more humid, and then I heard it, singing. Not human voices, vibrations. The ants were stridulating in harmony, creating patterns of sound that seemed almost like language, like music, like prayers. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't find the far walls, but what it did illuminate made my knees weak. Columns, hundreds of them, floor to ceiling, each one woven from human hair, black, brown, blonde, gray, white, twisted into massive structures that pulsed with ant movement. And in each column, suspended like insects in amber, were the chrysalises. They were the size of footballs, translucent. And inside each one, something moved, something that was almost ready to emerge. I approached the nearest column, magnifying glass trembling in my hand. The chrysalis wall was thin enough to see through, and what I saw inside made me understand the true horror of what was happening. Inside, curled like a fetus, was something that wasn't quite ant, wasn't quite human, but somewhere between. A synthesis, an evolution. It had the segmented body of an ant, but elongated. Limbs that could have been arms or legs. And a head. The head was the worst part. Too large. Too aware. Eyes that weren't compound but weren't human either. Something new, something designed. One of them opened those eyes, looked directly at me, and smiled. I ran. Behind me, the singing grew louder. Urgent. The ants on the walls began moving faster, streaming toward the columns. And ahead, I could hear something else. Footsteps. Too heavy to be ants, too rhythmic to be human. The sound of something bipedal but wrong. I burst from the tunnel into the boiler room, slammed the door behind me. My hands shook as I wedged a pipe against the handle. From below, scratching, scraping. Something testing the door with intelligent precision. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I should have called the authorities. The CDC, the FBI, anyone. But who would believe me? Ant colonies farming human hair to grow hybrid creatures in the basement of a nursing home. I'd be committed myself. Instead, I called Marcus. We need to evacuate the building. I told him everything. The chamber, the chrysalises, the things inside, the intelligence behind it all. Sarah, slow down. You're not making sense. I have photos. I did. Blurry, dark, but real. Marcus, those things are almost mature. When they hatch, I'll meet you there in an hour. But he never came. I waited in the parking lot, calling his phone repeatedly. No answer. As dawn broke over the desert, casting long shadows across the building, I made a decision. If no one would help, I'd get Grandma out myself. The day shift was starting when I entered. New faces. Younger. They didn't question when I signed in to visit room 247, but I noticed they all had that same perfect posture, that same unsettling stillness. Grandma was awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression of wonder. They sang all night, she whispered. Different than before, celebrating. Sarah, something beautiful is about to happen. I helped her dress, packed her medications. We're leaving now. Sarah, look. She pulled off her nightcap. Where the seeds had been planted, new growth sprouted. Not hair, not the translucent fibers like Mrs. Goldstein. Something between. Golden strands that moved on their own, reaching toward the wall crack like plants seeking sun, like antennae seeking connection. We need to go now. But as I wheeled her toward the door, Janet appeared in the hallway. Behind her, other staff members gathered. More than the day shift should have. Their eyes were wrong. Compound patterns flickered beneath human irises, and their movements too synchronized, too perfect. Going somewhere? Discharge papers. She's coming home with me. Janet smiled. That same cold smile, but now I could see what was behind it. I don't think so. How long? I asked, backing into the room. First generation? 15 years. We've been waiting, growing, preparing. She tilted her head at an impossible angle, joints moving in ways human necks weren't designed for. Your grandmother is honored. Her contribution will birth a queen. Grandma's new hair began writhing faster, reaching out like seeking tentacles. She moaned, but it wasn't pain, it was ecstasy. What are you? Evolution. Synthesis. The next step. Janet's face rippled, skin shifting over bone that wasn't quite the right shape. Humans grow weaker. Ants grow stronger. Together, we are perfect. You're parasites. Symbionts. We take only what you shed. Give back so much more. Strength, unity, purpose. She stepped closer and I could smell her. Earthy. Chemical, wrong. You've seen the nursery. Beautiful, isn't it? Soon, hundreds will emerge. Spread to other facilities, other hosts. Humanity won't die. It will transform. Grandma screamed, but it was a sound of joy. The golden strands on her head stretched, reaching for Janet. And Janet's scalp split open like a flower blooming, revealing antennae, compound eyes, mandibles clicking in that horrible singing rhythm. I grabbed a lamp, swung it at Janet's head. She dodged, impossibly fast, but it gave us seconds. I ran, pushing Grandma's wheelchair at full speed down the hall. Behind us, the singing started. Not just Janet. The walls themselves vibrated with it. Doors opened, residents emerged, some human, some less so, all moving to block our path with choreographed precision. The elevator was surrounded. Stairs it was. I lifted Grandma, adrenaline giving me strength I didn't know I had. Down one flight, two. Behind us, skittering, hundreds of feet, human and otherwise. The sound of evolution in pursuit. The ground floor was chaos. Real staff members screaming, running, as things emerged from the basement. The chrysalises had opened. Dozens of hybrids, still wet from their shells, learning to walk on limbs that couldn't decide what they were. We made it to the parking lot, to my car. I fumbled with keys as shapes poured from the building. Some walked, some crawled, some did something between, all beautiful in their wrongness. The engine started. I floored it. In the rearview mirror, Sunnyvale Senior Living writhed like a disturbed anthill. Black shapes swarmed the walls. Larger forms moved among them, directing, organizing, planning. "The hair," Grandma whispered, her voice different now, harmonious. I can still feel it, growing, changing me, connecting me to something wonderful. I drove to the only place I could think of, the university. Marcus would know what to do. He had to. His lab was empty, but his computer was on. Security footage from last night. I watched myself call him, watched him review my photos, watched his expression change from skepticism to recognition to satisfaction. The final frame showed him opening a specimen jar. Inside, ants identical to my samples. He'd known. He'd always known. A sound behind me. I turned to find Marcus in the doorway. His hair was different, thicker, moving slightly in non-existent wind, and his eyes, compound patterns flickered in their depths. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but progress requires sacrifice. You're one of them. Second generation. My mother was a resident at Sunnyvale 20 years ago. I've been preparing the way, publishing papers to discredit any real discoveries, ensuring the colonies could grow undisturbed." He smiled, and his teeth were too sharp, too many. "Did you really think this was random? That you found them by accident? Those things aren't evolution, they're abominations." He laughed, a sound like clicking mandibles. "Says the species destroying its own planet. We offer survival, partnership. Your grandmother will birth something magnificent." I backed toward the window, Grandma's breathing getting shallower in my arms. Outside, I could see them, streaming across the campus. Students and faculty moving with that same synchronized purpose. How many? How long had this been happening? "The authorities will find a gas leak, tragic explosion, no survivors, no evidence." He stepped closer and I could smell the earth scent of the colony on him. "Except you. You could join us willingly, your knowledge would be valuable." Through the window, I saw them. Thousands, millions. How many nursing homes? How many universities? How many hosts? The scope of it was staggering. "Never." I threw the computer monitor at him, grabbed Grandma, and ran. Again, always running, but where could we go? How do you escape something that's everywhere? That looks human until it doesn't. We've been driving for 3 days now, staying in motels that smell of disinfectant and desperation, avoiding crowds, avoiding mirrors. Grandma's transformation is accelerating. The golden hair covers half her scalp, moving with its own intelligence. Sometimes she speaks in the singing language. Sometimes she cries for what she's losing. Sometimes she smiles at what she's becoming. I don't know how much time we have, how much time anyone has. The radio reports are getting stranger. Unusual illness at Cleveland Nursing Home. Mass hysteria in Portland Senior Center. Scientists baffled by synchronized behavior in Miami facility. It's not random, it's coordinated, a global harvest. I'm uploading this to every platform I can find. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to believe. But I'm not hopeful. How do you fight an enemy that's already inside, that's been planning for decades? That offers transcendence instead of death. Check your walls for cracks. Check your pillows for missing hair. And if someone you love starts growing strange new fibers, run. Don't try to save them, just run, because I can feel it starting. This morning, I found 3 perfect circles on my scalp. Smooth, painless, precise. The seeds are already planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom. They're in me now, growing, changing. And the worst part? Part of me is starting to hear the music, starting to understand the singing, starting to see the beauty in what they're building, starting to think it sounds perfect. If you're still listening, check your hairbrush tonight. Count the strands. Tomorrow, count again. And if the number seems wrong, if you find tiny black dots near your pillow, if you hear singing in your walls, leave a comment below. Tell me I'm not alone. Tell me you see them too. Because I don't think I imagined this. I don't think Grandma imagined it, and I don't think you're imagining it either. They're real. They're spreading. And they're patient. So very, very patient. Subscribe if you want to know what happens next. If there is a next. The golden strands are spreading faster now. Soon, I might not be me anymore. Soon I might be something else. Something that sings. Something perfect. Something that knows the future of our species isn't extinction. It's evolution. Story number 4. The first bulb died at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know because I was awake, staring at the ceiling of my new apartment in Portland, Oregon, counting the water stains like constellations. The kitchen light flickered once, twice, then went out with a soft pop that shouldn't have made my skin crawl. But it did. I blamed it on the old wiring. This building was from 1924, all brick and character. The kind of place where the radiators hissed like living things and the floors creaked their own symphony at night. But here's the thing that made me sit up in bed. Heart suddenly racing for no good reason. The hallway lights started flickering immediately after. Short bursts, long pauses, short again. If you know Morse code, and I do, thanks to my grandfather who was a radio operator in Vietnam, you'd recognize it too. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. But that's crazy, right? That's what I told myself as I shuffled to the kitchen in my bare feet, the hardwood floor cold against my skin. Just coincidence. Old building, old wiring. Nothing more. Tell me, have you ever noticed how the dark feels different when you're truly alone? How it presses against you like something solid, something waiting. If you're listening to this in bed right now, maybe with just one light on, or maybe in complete darkness, I need you to know something. This story, it's why I sleep with every light in my apartment on now. Why I've memorized the location of every hardware store within a 10-mile radius. Why I keep a box of spare bulbs under my bed like some people keep baseball bats. And before you close this video, before you scroll to something else, ask yourself this. When was the last time you really paid attention to how your lights flicker? Because sometimes they're trying to tell you something. The story begins now. I moved to Portland 3 weeks before the bulbs started dying. Got a job at Powell's Books downtown. Found this apartment on Craigslist, 4th floor of an old building in the Pearl District. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, had seemed almost too eager to rent it to me. Such a lovely space, she'd said, her smile a little too wide. The previous tenant, well, they had to leave suddenly. Family emergency. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why the rent was so cheap for the area, why she'd dropped the price twice when I hesitated. But I was 26, fresh out of a bad breakup in Denver, and desperate for a new start. The apartment was perfect. Exposed brick walls, huge windows overlooking the street, original hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places. It even came partially furnished. A vintage couch, a dining table, and these beautiful old light fixtures that looked like they belonged in a museum. But I should have noticed the scorch marks. They were subtle, just slight discoloration around each light fixture, like someone had held a match too close to the wall. When I asked Mrs. Chen about them during the walkthrough, she waved dismissively. "Old building," she said. "Character marks. We keep meaning to paint over them, but the residents seem to like the authentic vintage look." For 3 weeks, everything was fine. I settled into my routine. Coffee at the shop downstairs, 8-hour shifts shelving books and recommending reads to tourists, evenings spent reading on my fire escape, watching the city lights blur in the Portland drizzle. That's when I met Tommy. He was the day security guard for the building across the street, and he'd wave at me every morning as I headed to work. Finally, about 2 weeks in, he crossed over during his smoke break. "You're in the Chen building," he said. Not really a question. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many night shifts and too much coffee. "Yeah, 4th floor. Great place." He took a long drag of his cigarette, studying the building's facade. "How long you planning to stay?" Something in his tone made me pause. "I don't know." "Why?" "Most folks don't last long up there. 4th floor especially." He flicked ash onto the sidewalk. "Building's got a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" He shrugged. "The kind where people move out sudden-like, usually around the 3-week mark." He looked at me directly then. "You been having any electrical problems?" I hadn't, not yet, but something cold settled in my stomach. "Why do you ask?" "Because that's how it always starts," Tommy said, grinding his cigarette under his heel. "Lights acting up. Bulbs burning out at weird times. People complain to Mrs. Chen, but nothing ever gets fixed. Then one day," he gestured to the building, "moving truck shows up." "What about the tenant before me?" Tommy's face darkened. "Nice girl. Photographer. Kept weird hours, but seemed decent enough. Then one night," he shook his head. "Look, kid, I've been watching this building for 15 years. I've seen maybe 20 people move into that apartment. Know how many stayed longer than 2 months? How many? 0. Then came that Tuesday night. After the kitchen and hallway lights went out, I grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the closet where I'd seen a couple spare bulbs. My hands shook slightly as I screwed in the new ones. Just adrenaline, I told myself. Just the surprise of being woken up. But when I touched the old bulbs to throw them away, they were ice cold. Shouldn't they have been hot? Shouldn't there have been some residual heat from the filaments that had just burned out? I stood there in my kitchen, holding 2 dead bulbs that felt like they'd been sitting in a freezer, and felt the first real stab of fear. The new bulbs worked fine. I went back to bed, eventually drifting off around 4 a.m. The next night, Wednesday, I woke to darkness again. 3:17 a.m., my phone screen confirmed it. Exact same time. This time, it was my bedroom light, flickering in that same pattern before dying. SOS. Then the bathroom light. SOS. Then the living room. SOS. I sat there in the dark, listening to my own breathing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe there was something wrong with the building's electrical system. Maybe some kind of power surge at the same time each night. I made a mental note to call the landlord in the morning. But then, in the silence that followed, I heard it. Footsteps. Above me, which should have been impossible. I lived on the top floor. The steps were slow, deliberate. They moved from one end of what would be my living room to the other, then stopped directly above where I sat. I held my breath, straining to hear more, but there was nothing. Just my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and then came the scratching, soft at first, like fingernails on wood. But it got louder, more insistent, like someone was clawing at the ceiling from above, trying to dig their way through. The sound followed the same pattern as the lights. Short scratches, long scratches, short again. SOS. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun finally came up, painting my walls gold through the tall windows, I felt ridiculous. Old buildings made noise, that was just physics. Wood expanding and contracting, pipes settling, nothing more. But I couldn't explain away what I found in my coffee mug that morning. I'd left it on the counter the night before, empty and clean. Now it was full of water. And floating in that water was a single photograph. Old, waterlogged, but still recognizable. It showed my apartment. My exact apartment, but from decades ago. Different furniture, different paint, but the same layout. The same windows. The same view of the street below. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, a woman with dark hair. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, absolute terror. At work that day, I found myself in the local history section during my lunch break. I'm not sure what I was looking for. Maybe just reassurance that my building had a boring, normal past. What I found instead made my coffee go cold in my hands. There was a newspaper article from 1987. A small item buried on page 6. Electrical fire claims local artist. The address made my stomach drop. It was my building, 4th floor. The article was brief. Sarah Millwood, 28, a photographer known for her night scenes of Portland, had died in her apartment. Electrical fire, they said, started around 3 a.m. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. But here's what made me close the book and push it away. The article mentioned that neighbors had complained for weeks about electrical issues. Lights burning out constantly. Always in patterns, always starting at 3:17 a.m. I kept digging. The Portland Library's digital archives had more. Police reports, fire department incident logs, insurance claims, and buried in the file, something that made my blood run cold. A witness statement from Mrs. Chen herself, dated just 2 days after Sarah's death. The tenant had been experiencing electrical problems for weeks, she'd told the investigators. Always complaining about lights burning out. I told her it was an old building, that these things happen. I had no idea she was in any real danger. But there was another document. A building maintenance log, also from 1987. It showed that Mrs. Chen had hired an electrician to inspect the 4th floor apartment just 1 week before Sarah died. The electrician's report was clean. No electrical problems found. No fire hazards. No reason for lights to be burning out at all. So why had Mrs. Chen lied to the police? I didn't go home after work. Instead, I wandered the Pearl District, ducking into coffee shops and bars, anywhere with people and light and noise. I called my best friend Emma back in Denver, trying to explain without sounding completely insane. "So, your lights are burning out?" she said, and I could hear her trying not to laugh. "Babe, that's what lights do. They burn out. In Morse code, M, SOS, every single time." "Okay, she paused. "That's actually kind of creepy. Have you talked to your landlord?" I hadn't. Part of me was afraid Mrs. Chen would think I was crazy. Another part was afraid she wouldn't. By 11 p.m., I couldn't avoid it anymore. I went home, armed with a fresh pack of bulbs from the hardware store and a bottle of wine for courage. The apartment looked normal in the light from the street. Cozy, even. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But Tommy was waiting for me in the lobby. "Saw you coming," he said, nodding towards the street. "You look like hell, kid." "Thanks. Really, what I needed to hear." He studied my face. "It's starting, isn't it? The electrical stuff?" I wanted to lie. Wanted to pretend everything was fine. Instead, I found myself telling him everything. The lights, The Morse code, the footsteps, the photograph in my coffee mug. Tommy listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "She's getting stronger," he finally said. "Who?" "Sarah, the photographer. This is the longest anyone's lived in that apartment since her. Usually people clear out after the first few nights of light shows. But you..." He looked at me curiously. "You know Morse code. You can understand what she's trying to say." "You're talking about her like she's still here." "She is still here. Been trying to tell people what really happened for 37 years. Problem is, most folks just think it's bad wiring and move out before they can piece it together." "Piece what together?" Tommy glanced around the empty lobby, then motioned for me to follow him. He led me to a small office behind the mailboxes, a security station with monitors showing different angles of the building. "I've been documenting this for years," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "Every tenant, every complaint, every mysterious exit." He spread photos across the desk, dozens of them, all showing the same thing. The fourth-floor windows flashing in perfect synchronization. "But look at this," he continued, pulling out a larger photograph. It was taken from his building, looking across at mine. The fourth-floor windows were lit up, and in one of them, clear as day, was the silhouette of a woman. "Took this 3 years ago. Previous tenant before you lasted 2 weeks." I stared at the image. The silhouette was unmistakably holding something. "A camera. She's still taking pictures," Tommy said quietly. "Still documenting, still trying to show people the truth." "What truth?" "That it wasn't an accident. That someone killed her and made it look like an electrical fire." He gathered the photos back into the folder. "Question is, kid, you gonna run like all the rest, or you gonna help her finally tell her story?" I stayed awake, sitting on my couch with all the lights on, watching Netflix with the volume turned up. 3:17 came and went. Nothing happened, see? Just coincidence. Just my imagination running wild because I'd read some old article. But at 3:18, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Why aren't you sleeping?" My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I hadn't given my number to anyone in Portland except Emma and my boss. I definitely hadn't given it to whoever this was. Another text arrived. "I've been waiting so long for someone like you." Then another. "Someone who could understand." And another. The others always ran too soon. I set my phone down with trembling fingers, but it immediately lit up again. "Don't ignore me, please. I've been alone for so long." I must have dozed off around 4, because I woke to the sound of glass breaking. One of my wine glasses had fallen from the counter. Except, I distinctly remembered putting it in the sink. As I cleaned up the shards, being careful not to cut myself, I noticed something that made my hands go still. The light fixture above the dining table. The vintage one that had come with the apartment. There was something inside it. Behind the frosted glass shade, a dark shape that shouldn't be there. I got a chair, my legs unsteady as I climbed up. The fixture was held in place by 3 small screws. My fingers fumbled with them, my heart beating so hard I was sure the downstairs neighbors could hear it. When the glass shade finally came free, something fell out, hitting the table with a soft thud. Photos. Old Polaroids, yellowed with age. I climbed down slowly, my mouth dry as dust. The photos were all of the apartment. My apartment. But from decades ago. Different furniture, different paint on the walls, but unmistakably the same space. In each photo, there was a woman. Dark hair, serious expression, always partially turned away from the camera as if she'd been caught mid-movement. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the lights. In every single photo, the lights were caught in the act of burning out. You could see the filaments glowing too bright, that moment just before they die. and in the margin of each photo written in neat handwriting, times, 317, 318, 319, and at the bottom of each photo in the same handwriting a single word, help. The last photo was different. It showed the woman clearly, facing the camera directly. She was holding something, a piece of paper with dots and dashes drawn on it. Morse code, but not SOS. I grabbed my phone, pulled up a Morse code translator. My fingers shook as I input the pattern. Help me. But there was more. Another line of code below the first. He's coming back. That's when the lights went out. All of them. All at once. In the absolute darkness of my apartment, I heard it again. Footsteps above me. But this time, they weren't staying up there. This time, I heard them on the stairs. The stairs that led nowhere. The stairs that ended at my ceiling. Step, step, step. Getting closer. My phone buzzed in my hand, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. Unknown number. Against every horror movie instinct I had, I answered it. Static. Then, faint as a whisper, "Why did you stop replacing them?" The line went dead. I ran. Grabbed my keys and ran, taking the stairs 3 at a time, bursting out onto the street where normal people were living normal lives. I called Emma again from the 24-hour diner 2 blocks away, my voice shaky as I told her everything. "You need to find somewhere else to stay," she said, all traces of skepticism gone. "Tonight. Figure the rest out tomorrow, but don't go back there tonight." She was right. I knew she was right. But I also knew I'd left those photos on my dining room table. Evidence. Proof that I wasn't going crazy. And my laptop was there with all my work files, my clothes, my life. "I just need to grab a few things," I told her. 5 minutes, in and out. Famous last words, right? I waited until sunrise. Somehow, that felt safer, as if whatever was happening in my apartment followed vampire rules. The morning was typical Portland gray, drizzle misting my face as I stood outside my building, working up the courage to go back in. Mrs. Chen was in the lobby, watering the half-dead ferns that lined the entrance. She looked up when I came in, and something flickered across her face. Concern? Fear? It was gone before I could be sure. "Good morning, dear," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Everything all right?" I wanted to tell her, wanted to demand answers about Sarah Millwood, about the electrical problems, about why she'd really been so eager to rent to me. Instead, I forced a smile. Just forgot something upstairs. She watched me all the way to the elevator, but as the doors closed, I heard her on the phone. "He needs to come, now. She's figuring it out." My apartment door was open, just slightly, but definitely open. I knew I'd locked it when I ran out. My hand hovered over the doorknob, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to never come back. But those photos... I pushed the door open. The apartment was full of light. Not regular light. Every single bulb was on, burning so bright it hurt to look at them. The air smelled like hot metal and something else, something chemical and wrong. And there, at my dining room table, sat a woman. She had her back to me, dark hair falling past her shoulders. She was arranging something on the table. The photos, I realized, putting them in neat rows like she was playing solitaire. "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. "I'm sorry about what happened to you." She turned then, and I understood why every photo had caught her in profile. Half her face was gone, burned away, leaving exposed bone and tissue that somehow still moved when she smiled. "Not sorry enough to leave," she said, her voice like static, like electrical interference. "They never are." "I'll go," I said quickly. "I'll pack right now. I'll leave today." She laughed, a sound like bulbs popping. That's what he said too, the one before you and the one before that. She stood, moving with jerky, unnatural movements, like a film missing frames. But you all come back, always, to check one more time, to get one more thing, to solve the mystery. She was between me and the door now. Behind her, the lights began to flicker, not randomly this time. In perfect synchronization. A message in Morse code, repeating over and over. But not SOS, not help me. Stay. I don't understand, I whispered. What do you want? I wanted someone to see, she said, reaching out with a hand that was more bone than flesh. Someone to know what happened, the real story, not the newspaper lie about an electrical fire. The lights flickered faster now, and in their staccato rhythm, I saw flashes of images like a slideshow, like memories burned into the filaments themselves. Sarah, working late in her darkroom, the one that used to be my bedroom. Sarah, developing photos of Portland's nightlife, always searching for the perfect shot. Sarah, arguing with someone, a man whose face I couldn't quite see. Sarah, frightened, changing all her locks. Sarah sleeping with every light on because she was afraid of the dark, afraid of who might be waiting in it. And then, Sarah waking to the smell of smoke. Sarah finding her door blocked from the outside. Sarah trying to signal for help with the only thing she could control. The lights, SOS, over and over. But the neighbors just complained about the electrical problems. No one understood. No one came. He made it look like an accident, she said. And now she was so close I could feel the heat radiating from her ruined flesh. Electrical fire, faulty wiring. No one questioned it, no one investigated, and he walked away. The lights went out again, plunging us into darkness, but I could still see her, glowing faintly like a dying bulb. "Who?" I asked. "Who did this to you?" She smiled that terrible smile. "The landlord's son, Mrs. Chen's precious boy. She knows, she's always known. But family is family, isn't it?" A door slammed somewhere in the building. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful. "He still has a key," Sarah whispered. "Still comes to check, to make sure I stay quiet, to make sure the new tenants don't stay long enough to figure it out." The footsteps stopped outside my door. "Run," Sarah said, and suddenly she wasn't between me and the door anymore. She was behind me, pushing me forward with hands that felt like live wires. "Run, now. Tell someone. Tell everyone. Make them believe." The door began to open. I ran. I made it to the stairwell just as I heard him enter my apartment. I didn't look back, just flew down those stairs like my life depended on it. Which maybe it did. Behind me, I heard shouting. A man's voice, angry and confused. Then Sarah's voice, no longer static but strong and clear. "Not this one. Not again." The sound that followed, I can't describe it. Like every electrical appliance in the world turning on at once. Like lightning striking over and over in the same place. The building's lights, all of them, began to flash in that synchronized pattern. Not just my floor. Floor, every hallway, every apartment. By the time I burst out onto the street, people were already gathering, pointing at the building as every window flashed with that same message, "Help me, help me, help me." Someone called 911. Within minutes, the street was full of emergency vehicles. I watched from across the street as they evacuated the building. Residents streaming out in their pajamas and robes, confused and frightened. And then, I saw him, Mrs. Chen's son. I recognized him from a family photo in the lobby I'd never paid attention to before. He was being led out by 2 police officers, his face pale, his eyes wild. He looked up at the building, at the lights still flashing their message, and I saw the moment he broke. The moment he understood that Sarah had finally found a way to be heard, Tommy found me in the crowd. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with something like wonder. 37 years and you finally did it. The investigation that followed uncovered everything. David Chen's obsession with Sarah Millwood, the restraining order she'd filed 2 weeks before her death, the way he'd used his mother's keys to enter her apartment, the fire that was no accident, Mrs. Chen's 37 years of covering for her son, of renting to tenants who never stayed long, of keeping Sarah's story buried. They found evidence in the basement, photos he'd kept, trophies. Sarah wasn't his only victim, just the only one who found a way to fight back. I never went back to the apartment. The building was condemned shortly after. Something about electrical damage too extensive to repair. They say on quiet nights, people still see lights flickering in the windows. Still see messages in Morse code. Different messages now. Thank you, being the most common. I live in a new place now. A boring, modern apartment with boring, modern wiring. I keep spare bulbs just in case, but they burn out the normal way. Randomly, silently, without trying to tell me anything. But sometimes, usually around 3:17 a.m., I wake up and check my lights, just to be sure. And sometimes in that drowsy space between sleep and waking, I swear I can see her. Sarah, standing by my window, whole and unburned, taking photos of the city lights. She looks peaceful now. So, next time your lights flicker, maybe pay attention. Maybe listen. Because sometimes the dead don't want revenge. They just want someone to hear their story. To know the truth. To make sure it doesn't happen again. And if you're lying in bed right now, maybe about to drift off to sleep, and your light flickers just once, well, it's probably nothing. Probably just old wiring. Probably just your imagination running wild because of some story you heard on YouTube. Probably. But just in case, maybe check your Morse code translator. Maybe Google your building's history. Maybe ask yourself why your rent is so cheap, why the landlord was so eager, why the previous tenant left so suddenly. Or maybe just pull the covers up a little higher and tell yourself it's nothing. That's what most people do. That's what I would have done before. Sweet dreams. And remember, if you see the lights flashing SOS, someone might really need your help. The question is, are you brave enough to answer? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had lights that seem to be trying to tell you something? Has anyone else noticed strange patterns in their electrical problems? And does anyone know Morse code well enough to decode what your lights might be saying? Because I've been getting messages, lots of messages, from people all over the country who are starting to pay attention to their lights, starting to see the patterns, starting to understand that sometimes the dead don't rest because their stories were never told. What story are your lights trying to tell? Subscribe if you want to hear more true stories of the unexplained. Hit the notification bell if you're brave enough to wake up at 3:17 a.m. with me. And definitely share this with someone who complains about electrical problems. You might just save their life, or help save someone who's already gone.